Nigeria's housing deficit was about 7 million housing units in 1991, and it has continued to worsen over the past 2 decades, rising to 12 million in 2007, 14 million in 2010, 20 million in 2018, and 28 million in 2023. Housing deficit is the measure of the number of housing needed to accommodate the population of an area. This takes into account houses and shelters that are existing but are not in habitable condition, and those that are lacking and need to be built. With an average household size of 6 people per household, a deficit of 28 million housing units implies that about 168 million Nigerians are either unhoused or housed in uninhabitable conditions. That's about 80% of the country's estimated population. It is alarming. To significantly reduce the housing need, at least 1 million housing units need to be built yearly for the next 10 years to cater for the current and future population. The Federal Ministry of Housing and Urban Development bears the responsibility of meeting that target. It is the ministry responsible for ensuring adequate and sustainable housing delivery in the country, either directly through the Federal Housing Authority or by facilitating such housing provision from the private sector. Yet, according to the Central Bank of Nigeria, formal housing production is approximately 100,000 units per year. That's a grossly inadequate 1/10 of the official yearly target. It is also alarming. There are a lot of reasons for such poor housing supply, such as the country's financial system, land administration system, the cost of building materials, and many more. While it's a nationwide issue, this video focuses on housing problems that stem from land administration in the context of Abuja, which is quite different from many other cities in the country. While the city may lack housing to a significant degree, it's also known to have a lot of empty houses. This makes estimating the city's housing deficit a bit more complicated. Basically, housing deficit can be measured as the difference between the number of possible households, that is, individuals or families that can make up a home, and the number of permanent dwellings or housing units. For instance, if there are a total of 50 possible households in a city and there are 30 housing units, it implies that there is a deficit of 20 units. However, if 10 of those 30 existing units are vacant, yet they cannot be occupied for different reasons, especially affordability, then does it not imply that there's an actual deficit of 30 housing units? Feel free to share your thoughts about this in the comments. If you haven't, please also subscribe to this channel and like this video wherein we'll be exploring land administration and its effect on housing in Abuja, particularly as related to affordability and informality. That said, welcome to Nigerian urbanism. Let us begin with housing affordability, which is a little bit ambiguous in the Nigerian context. Globally, affordable housing is that which, pardon my secular definition, is deemed affordable by a section of society whose income is below the median household income. Typically, the money spent on housing should be no more than 30% of household income for housing rents and 5 times the annual household income for outright purchase for that housing to be considered affordable. So, for example, if a household earns a total income of 300,000 naira monthly, it implies that the rent that household should pay yearly for their housing to be considered affordable to them is just over 1 million naira. Or if they want to outrightly purchase a house, anything above 18 million naira is beyond their affordable reach. That's the most widely accepted math of it. In applying this, housing affordability becomes very subjective because what is affordable to one household may not be affordable to another based on their household income. Therefore, to know what affordable housing in Nigeria is, we need to know what the average household income in Nigeria is. But because of a lack of reliable data, we don't know that, and neither does the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics. This makes it quite difficult to recommend, develop, or implement policies for affordable housing because we are yet to truly define what affordable housing is. All we can do is strive to bring the cost of housing down with no real target. Now, the cost of housing itself is highly dependent on the cost of land because land is the most important resource for housing, or the most foundational at least. This makes the Nigerian Land Use Act of 1978, which stipulates the procedure for the control and management of land, very important to this story. The Act vests all land comprised in the territory of each state solely to the governor of the state, who would hold such land in trust for the people and would be responsible for allocation of land in urban areas. In many parts of the country, to own a house, one has to first acquire land from the state government and then build their own house. In many cases, the process isn't as straightforward as it may seem, and it is riddled with a lot of complications, but that's a story for another day. Now, there is a school of thought which I agree with, that urban land should not be held by individuals because of how valuable it is. The idea is that while in rural areas where there is less demand for land, people can acquire land to get housing at an individual or family level, in urban areas, a parcel of land should provide housing for more than one household. This is good for compact urban development and has many other socioeconomic and environmental benefits because it also helps to curtail urban sprawl. In Abuja, the individual's route to housing through land acquisition, which is arguably an unsustainable method of urban development, is beginning to fade. The alternative routes are through private housing developers or public or government housing schemes. Unfortunately, the government cannot afford to build houses at the scale required in cities. This leaves private housing developers to become major game players in housing provision. Now, housing developers are running a business. They are after profit. So whatever they invest in providing housing, including the cost of land acquisition, is transferred to the eventual residents. Now, here's what commonly happens when land is acquired in the FCT. 1. A party acquires land without intention to develop, holds on to that piece of land, waits for the value of land to increase over time, then sells that piece of land to another party for profit. This is a process of land speculation, and it could repeat itself for a number of times, increasing the cost of that piece of land and of the housing that will eventually be built with every transfer. So, a party acquires land, which may also have been transferred a number of times, with the intention to develop, but limited development capacity. They then enter into a joint venture partnership with other parties who may have better capacity to develop, with an agreement to split the eventual profit of the housing product. This also increases the cost of housing to increase the shareable profits. 3. A party that entered into a joint venture agreement may not have the outright capital to develop housing as agreed. They then begin to market their housing plans, and you'll see this a lot on Instagram, to housing investors who purchase housing units at different development stages and rising prices. This also increases the cost of housing to the eventual residents because those housing investors are also looking to make profits. Essentially, the more people involved from the stage of land acquisition to the point of housing delivery, the less affordable the house is likely to be. This is where government intervention is key. Now, the Federal Capital Territory Act of 1976 delegates to the Minister of the Federal Capital Territory any function or power conferred by any law vested in the governor or military governor of a state. In effect, the Minister of the FCT is responsible for allocation of land in urban areas of the FCT. Recall that the governor or the minister in the case of the FCT holds land in trust for the people. It is a public resource and so should be beneficial to the public. This could be through housing development, agriculture, mining, or other activities on land. However, when a person holds land to sell for profit with no development or activity on land, they are essentially making personal gain on a public resource. It is therefore the responsibility of the government to protect the public interest by minimizing the parties involved in the process and ensuring more direct delivery of housing to the residents. There are several ways this can be done, albeit each with their limitations in Nigeria. 1. Land should only be administered to parties that show intent, capacity, and readiness to promptly develop housing, and hefty property taxes should be imposed on allocated, yet vacant or undeveloped land that provide little to no value to the public. This puts more responsibility on the Department of Development Control, which is already understaffed and underfunded, to monitor the pace of development on allocated land, whether they have granted them a development approval or not. 2. Government should allocate land to developers who have shown that intent, capacity, and readiness to develop at zero to heavily subsidized cost. This way, the government does not see land as a revenue-making resource, but uses land for the potential that it has to provide other socioeconomic benefits through affordable housing. This will minimize the capital investment of developers and reduce the cost of the housing product. However, there is a high risk of private developers acquiring subsidized land, developing housing, and distributing such housing at market rates, especially if there is limited government monitoring and control. Additionally, people in government offices and politicians are likely to abuse such a scenario by allocating subsidized land to themselves or their affiliated entities. 3. Government should administer land to developers with the agreement that developed housing will only be sold back to the government at a maximum agreed price. This way, the government becomes responsible for distributing the houses through different means. This again depends on government efficiency and minimal levels of corruption. Meanwhile, while the price of housing continues to rise, remember, not only due to land administration, a high number of urban residents in Abuja and other parts of the FCT are forced to rely on the informal housing sector to meet their housing needs. Abuja is one of the fastest growing cities in Africa. As the urban population increases, so too does the demand for housing and supporting infrastructure. However, there is a shortage of legitimate housing in the city, and there is high unaffordability of existing houses. This results in the surge of informal and usually more affordable housing developments. Informal housing in this context refers to any housing that is developed regardless of its quality without legitimate land tenure or development approval. This includes slum developments, expanding indigenous settlements, and illegal housing estates. One of the major factors that stimulates the development of informal housing in the FCT is also the process of land administration. In a previous video on the profile of Abuja, I had illustrated the difference between the Federal Capital City, which is Abuja, and the Federal Capital Territory. It shows that the city occupies about 8% of the total land area of the territory. Now, the city and its associated satellite towns is recognized as the urban area of the FCT. Those are the land areas for which the minister is responsible. The Land Use Act also stipulates that similar powers with respect to non-urban areas are conferred on local governments. The FCT is divided into 6 area councils: Abaji, Wari, Wagwalada, Kwali, Kuje, and the Abuja Municipal Area Council, known as AMAC, where the actual city is located. So when Buju Benson sings this, it's not as crazy or senseless as a lot of people think. Now, these area councils are technically the different local government areas of the FCT, and so the powers of land allocation in those areas, where not declared as urban, are vested on the area councils. So for a long period of time, these area councils, through zonal coordinators, could plan residential layouts and allocate plots to individuals and groups. However, over time, succeeding zonal coordinators would prepare layout plans for areas already previously planned for and allocate plots in those areas to a different set of individuals and groups. This led to a lot of overlapping layouts and double allocations, compounded by the fact that at the time there was no composite register of land allocations. Different area councils and different zonal coordinators within area councils were operating independently and with minimal monitoring from the minister of the FCT. This was until 2003 when the Abuja Geographic Information System was established to computerize the cadastral and land registry of the Federal Capital City, the area councils, and satellite towns of the Federal Capital Territory. All area councils were instructed to submit their land registry details to AGIS so that they could be captured in one digital database. The inconsistencies and duplicities then became glaring. In 2006, the FCT Minister, Malam Nasir El-Rufai, initiated a drive to resolve the land issues in the area councils through harmonization and regularization of land titles. This would require individuals to present their land allocation from area councils to AGIS for verification and then receiving a ministerial certificate of occupancy that serves as the ultimate land title document. According to someone with extensive knowledge on the subject matter, despite individuals paying a sum of 100,000 naira to regularize their land titles, no single certificate of occupancy has been received since that time.
In 2006, see, now that we are talking, no single, because what you find intended, people paid 100,000 to submit your allocation letter so that they can find out whether your data is genuine or not, and you'll be issuing ministers CFO letter on the property that belongs to you, even though it was originally issued by the area council. Since that 2006 till now that we are talking together, no single one has been issued by any minister.
Yet in 2020, the director of AGIS said that it had received about 10,000 applications from the public for the regularization of their area council titles. At the stated cost of 100,000 naira per application submission, this amounts to about 1 billion naira in public revenue. The Federal Capital City, whose land is administered by the minister through the Department of Land Administration, also falls within the Abuja Municipal Area Council, which has its own zonal coordinator. But the boundaries of the FCC are clear, so the minister will control land in specific areas while the area council controls the other areas. Seems pretty straightforward, right? This map I've made reference to a number of times in different videos shows the original 4 phases of the city of Abuja, which are subdivided into sectors and into districts. Now, the Federal Capital Development Authority felt that there was a need for additional districts in response to rising housing demand and population growth. So, sometime between 2010 and 2013, some land areas that existed under AMAC that fell within this area known as the belly of the city was incorporated to become Phase 5 of Abuja. This further complicated land administration because it automatically brought these areas under the land control of the minister of the FCT, not the zonal coordinator of AMAC, delegitimizing land titles allocated to people in those areas by AMAC. More so, the FCDA began to prepare development plans for such areas, neglecting the layout plans previously prepared by AMAC. To address all these compounding complications, in 2016, the FCT minister, Mohammed Musa Bello, completely stopped all allocation of land in the FCT, inclusive of the Federal Capital City and all area councils. That non-allocation carried up until the end of his tenure in 2023. In effect, the FCT has suffered an 8-year-long stagnation in land allocation, which ran simultaneously to the 20-year-long complications in land administration that is still yet to be regularized. While all of this was happening, the urban population did not stay stagnant. It continued to grow rapidly, and of course, people need a place to stay, so they turned to the informal housing sector. In the 2 decades that it has been taking the FCT to sort out its land administration mess, informal housing developers have been emboldened to dam whatever consequences that may arise in future, acquire land by any means they can, including land grabbing, and provide housing to meet the urgent need of the growing population. For such people, warnings of eventual demolition are unfrightening, more so as they may have sold some of their developed houses to unaware subscribers who will be the victims of demolition or other such complications whenever the time comes. The housing crisis in Nigeria, particularly in Abuja, is a multifaceted issue rooted in challenges such as land administration, housing affordability, and the proliferation of informal housing. The relationship between land administration and housing affordability reveals a critical juncture in the housing delivery process. The involvement of multiple parties from land acquisition to housing delivery tends to increase the overall cost, making houses less affordable. Government intervention is crucial in streamlining this process, reducing the number of intermediaries and ensuring more direct housing delivery to residents. Furthermore, the issue of housing informality in Abuja is as a result of prolonged and convoluted land administration system. The stagnation in land allocation for 8 years, coupled with decades-long complications in land administration, has fueled the growth of informal housing developments. Granted, the housing crisis is not unique to Abuja or even to Nigeria. The cost of housing is rising all over the world, but it is necessary for cities to begin to take local action based on their own specific context to make housing more affordable and accessible. This video only scratches the surface of one factor that affects urban housing in Abuja, but as usual, your thoughts and suggestions are always welcome in the comments below. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and share it as far and wide as you can. Thank you for watching, and a big thank you to every person who I spoke to get some more information and clarity on land administration in the FCT. See you next time.